Saying goodbye to the person you love most in the world is something no one can ever prepare you for. As I walked down the sterile, dimly lit hospital corridor, every step felt heavier than the last. My heart was pounding in my chest, my throat tight as if every unshed tear had decided to form a lump that refused to be swallowed. The hum of fluorescent lights above, the distant beeping of machines, and the quiet shuffle of nurses' shoes all blurred together in a dull symphony of grief. I stopped outside room 317, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. This was it, the final goodbye. My husband, Mark, had been my anchor for over 20 years. We'd built a life filled with laughter, love, and the kind of shared dreams that most couples only read about in novels. Now, all those dreams felt like fragile glass, shattered by the cruel reality of illness. The doctors had told us there was nothing more they could do. Mark's cancer had spread rapidly, devouring every ounce of hope we'd stubbornly clung to. The past few weeks had been a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations, and desperate prayers. But now, it was time to let go. As I stepped into his room, I forced a smile for his sake, though I knew he could see the pain etched in my eyes. He was so weak, so frail, nothing like the strong, confident man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. His hand, once warm and firm, now felt cold and fragile in mine. We talked quietly, voices barely above a whisper. He tried to comfort me, even as he struggled for breath. "I love you, Anna," he said, his voice trembling. "Promise me you'll be okay." I squeezed his hand, fighting back the sob threatening to escape. "I promise, Mark," I whispered, my words choking on the truth. I had no idea how I would ever be okay without him. For a long moment, we just sat together, holding on to the little time we had left. The nurses gave us privacy, and the world seemed to slow down to the rhythm of his shallow breaths. I memorized every detail, his face, his scent, the sound of his voice, knowing this would be my last chance. Eventually, it was time to go. The doctor gently urged me to let him rest, promising to call if there was any change. I stood, kissed Mark's forehead, and lingered at the doorway, unable to move. With a heavy heart, I turned and walked away, each step a small betrayal, as if leaving him was a choice I could refuse. My vision blurred with tears as I navigated the maze of hospital hallways. I clung to the promise I'd made, unsure if I could ever keep it. But I didn't want Mark's last memory of me to be one of brokenness. I wanted to be strong, for him and for myself. Outside the room, the world kept moving as if nothing had changed, as if my world hadn't just ended. Nurses passed by, deep in conversation. Visitors arrived carrying flowers and balloons, faces filled with hope. I envied them, their lives untouched by the kind of sorrow I now carried like a shadow. I took one last look at the door, whispered a silent goodbye, and forced myself to keep walking. The weight of my grief was suffocating, pressing in on all sides, but I kept moving, because stopping would mean drowning in memories, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Every part of me felt numb, disconnected from the reality of what had just happened. Mark was still alive, but I knew our time was measured in hours, maybe days at best. The finality of it all loomed over me, threatening to crush what little strength I had left. I wandered down the hall, unsure of where I was going. My mind replayed every moment of our last conversation, clinging to his words like a lifeline. I tried to remember the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his embrace, desperate to hold on to anything that would keep him close a little longer. As I reached the elevator, I paused, overcome by a sudden wave of grief. Tears streamed down my face, hot and relentless. I pressed my forehead to the cool metal doors, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, so lost, so utterly broken. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. My world had come undone, and all I could do was stand there, suspended between goodbye and the unbearable weight of what comes next. Little did I know, everything I believed about my husband and our life together was about to be shattered by a truth so shocking, it would change everything. As the elevator door slid open and I stepped inside, the walls felt like they were closing in on me, trapping me inside my own heartbreak. I pressed the button for the ground floor with a shaky hand, feeling as though even that small motion required more strength than I possessed. The doors closed, and for a brief, merciful moment I was alone with my grief. No curious eyes, no forced words of comfort, just the low hum of the elevator and the roar of loss in my chest. My mind wandered through the years Mark and I had shared. The echo of his laughter at our wedding, the quiet mornings we spent reading in bed, the way he used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. Every memory felt sharper now, a double-edged blade, reminding me of everything I had to lose. I wiped my cheeks, but more tears came, unstoppable. I was falling apart, and there was no one to catch me. Mark and I had built a life from scratch. We'd faced our share of struggles, lost jobs, a miscarriage, the death of his father, but we'd always pulled through. I'd always believed that love could conquer anything, even the worst life could throw at us. But disease didn't care how much you loved someone. It didn't care about promises or dreams or the life you'd worked so hard to build. It just took and took until there was nothing left but heartache. The elevator chimed and the doors slid open again. I blinked into the harsh fluorescent light of the lobby, momentarily disoriented. I took a few unsteady steps, ignoring the sympathetic glances from the woman at the reception desk and the security guard by the door. I wanted to disappear, to become invisible. Just another face passing through a place where people came to lose and to hope in equal measure. My body moved on autopilot, but my mind was trapped in the room upstairs, replaying the last words Mark had spoken, the way his hand had trembled in mine. I felt raw and exposed, as if every nerve in my body had been peeled back and left to burn in the cold air of the hospital. I made it outside and found a bench near the entrance, needing to sit to ground myself before I could even think about driving home. The air was thick with the scent of rain and cut grass, an ordinary day for everyone else, but for me, the world had changed. A couple walked by, holding hands, laughing quietly. A father hoisted his young daughter onto his shoulders, her giggle piercing through the static of my grief. I envied their happiness, their ignorance of the kind of pain that left you gasping for breath. I took out my phone and stared at the screen, the list of missed calls and unanswered texts blurring before my eyes. Friends and family had reached out, offering support and prayers, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I possibly say? That the man I loved was dying and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it? That my world was unraveling and all I could do was watch? I scrolled through photos, lingering on one of us at the beach last summer. Mark with his arm around me, his smile so wide and bright you'd never guess he was already sick. He'd been so determined to live, to fight, to make every day count. I'd been right there beside him, believing we still had time. But time was a thief. It stole moments and memories, leaving only regrets in its wake. As I sat there, lost in thought, a heavy wave of guilt washed over me. Had I done enough? Had I told him I loved him often enough? Did he know how much he meant to me? The questions crowded in, impossible to answer. I felt small and helpless, battered by a storm I couldn't escape. The hospital loomed behind me, a silent reminder that I was now standing on the edge of a new, uncertain future. Mark had always been the strong one, the steady presence I could rely on. Without him, I felt like I was drifting, unmoored and alone. The urge to run back inside and beg for more time was overwhelming, but I knew it would be pointless. The doctors had been clear, and I'd seen the truth in Mark's eyes. All I could do was honor his wishes and try to find a way to keep going, even when every instinct screamed at me to give up. My hands shook as I tried to take a deep breath, grounding myself in the simple act of breathing. In, out. In, out. The world kept spinning, even if mine had stopped. I knew somehow that I had to keep moving. For Mark. For myself. For the life we'd built together, even if it was now in ruins. And so I sat there, letting the grief wash over me, surrendering to it for a moment before I would be forced to face whatever came next. Unaware that a whisper, a secret, was about to break through my sorrow and change everything I thought I knew. I don't remember how long I sat there on that cold metal bench outside the hospital. The minutes bled into each other, my mind drifting between fragments of memories and the dull ache that had settled deep in my bones. At some point, the ache was replaced by a numbness, a strange calm after the storm of emotion that had racked me since leaving Mark's side. I looked up at the hospital entrance, half expecting to see Mark appear, smiling, waving at me as if the last few hours had been nothing more than a bad dream. The longing for that impossible reality twisted inside me. I told myself I needed to go home. I needed to pull myself together, to call Mark's sister, to prepare for the days ahead. I stood, my legs shaky but determined, and started walking slowly toward the parking lot. Just as I turned the corner past the emergency entrance, voices caught my attention. 2 nurses standing in the alcove just off the main walkway, speaking in hushed tones. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. I would have kept my head down, minding my own business. But something in their voices, a strained urgency, made me pause. "Did you hear what Dr. Porter did?" the younger nurse whispered, her words barely more than a breath. "I still can't believe it. After everything with Mr. Turner..." My heart stuttered. Turner, Mark's last name. I ducked behind a column, feeling foolish and intrusive, but unable to move away. "It's just so wrong," the older nurse replied, glancing around nervously. "He should have told the family. She has a right to know." My body tensed, every nerve suddenly on fire. The right to know what? "I heard they found something on his latest scans, something that wasn't there before," the younger nurse continued, voice trembling. "But Dr. Porter said not to mention it to Mrs. Turner yet. He said there was no point, that it would only make things harder." A cold wave of confusion washed over me. Found something? Not there before? I pressed closer, heart racing, desperate for answers and terrified of what I might learn. The older nurse's voice softened, tinged with regret. "They're not telling her everything. If it was me, I'd want to know the truth about my husband. I don't care how bad it is." The younger nurse nodded, her eyes wide. "Me too, but Dr. Porter said it's for the best. I guess they're just trying to keep her from falling apart." I heard the shuffle of feet as the 2 nurses started to walk away, their conversation fading into the hum of hospital life. I stayed hidden, clutching my chest as if I could physically hold myself together. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. What truth was being kept from me? What did the doctors know that I didn't? The world around me seemed to tilt, the air suddenly too thin, too sharp. A sickening dread settled in my stomach. I'd spent the last few hours preparing myself for Mark's death, trying to find a way to say goodbye. But now, a seed of doubt had been planted, one that threatened to unravel the fragile acceptance I'd managed to piece together. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Had Mark known? Had he been protecting me? Or was this something the doctors had kept from both of us? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. My hands shook as I considered what to do. Confront the nurses? Demand answers from Dr. Porter? Or pretend I hadn't heard anything? Let the secret stay buried? I couldn't move, rooted to the spot by a cocktail of fear and anger and disbelief. The idea that there could be something worse than losing Mark, a betrayal, a lie, was almost too much to bear. I replayed the nurse's words in my mind, searching for clues. Something on the scans. Something not there before. The right to know. My right. Mark's right. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth, stifling a cry. The grief that had consumed me only minutes before was now mixed with suspicion and outrage. I'd always trusted the doctors, believed they had Mark's best interests at heart. But now, every interaction, every vague answer, every quiet conversation seemed tinged with deceit. Suddenly, I needed answers more than I needed comfort. I wiped my tears, steadied my breathing, and forced myself to stand up straight. If there was something more to Mark's illness, if I was being kept in the dark, I would find out. I owed that to Mark and to myself. The pain of losing him was already unbearable. The idea that his final days could have been shrouded in lies was a fresh wound, bleeding and raw. I took one last look at the hospital, steeling myself for whatever came next. The truth, whatever it was, would not stay hidden for long. I was determined to pull it into the light, no matter how much it hurt. I stood rooted behind that cold stone column, my heart pounding so violently it drowned out the sounds of passing cars and distant ambulance sirens. I tried to steady my breathing. But the world around me had narrowed to a pinpoint, the echo of the nurses' voices bouncing in my skull. The right to know. They're not telling her everything. I stared down at my shaking hands, my mind racing in 1,000 directions. Every instinct screamed at me to rush back into the hospital, to confront Dr. Porter and demand the truth. But fear gripped me just as tightly. What if whatever they were hiding was worse than I imagined? What if I'd missed some last chance to save Mark, to be there for him in a way he needed most? I leaned heavily against the column, eyes squeezed shut, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. The idea that I'd been left in the dark, deliberately, sent a hot flare of betrayal through my grief. I'd trusted the staff, clung to every word from Dr. Porter and his team like it was a lifeline. Mark and I had always been honest with each other, even about the difficult things. Had he known and kept this from me to spare my feelings? Or had they kept the truth from him too, leaving us both to drown in half-truths and false hope? The weight of not knowing was unbearable. I replayed every conversation I'd had with the doctors over the last few weeks, searching for hidden meanings, remembering every moment I'd felt brushed aside or given only the barest details. I thought of the nurse who couldn't meet my eyes when I'd asked about Mark's pain, the doctor who'd hurried out of the room when my questions got too pointed. Had the signs been there all along, invisible in my haze of worry and exhaustion? I wanted to scream, to break something, to make the world stop for just 1 second so I could piece together what was real. My mind tumbled back to Mark's last days, searching for any indication that he'd known something he hadn't told me. Had his gentle insistence that I leave to rest been more than kindness? Had he been protecting me from a truth he thought I couldn't handle? The idea hurt, but it would have been like him. He was always trying to shield me from pain, even when it meant taking the brunt of it himself. But what if he hadn't known either? What if the doctors had made a decision for us, keeping vital information hidden behind closed doors? I shivered, the betrayal stinging in the summer air. I couldn't help but imagine the alternate paths. Would Mark's final days have been different if I'd known the whole truth? Would we have chosen differently? Said goodbye differently? It felt like being robbed all over again, a new kind of loss layered on top of the old. I watched as the nurses finished their whispered conversation and walked away, unaware that their words had upended the fragile peace I'd been clinging to. I wanted to follow them, demand answers, but my feet felt glued to the ground. I was terrified of what I might find out, and even more terrified of remaining in the dark. Eventually, the fear turned to resolve. I realized I could not go home, could not sit by Mark's bedside pretending to be at peace, until I knew exactly what had been hidden from me. The hospital that had once felt like a place of comfort and care now loomed before me as a fortress of secrets, its walls echoing with things I was never meant to hear. The air buzzed with the possibility of revelation, every nerve in my body alive with a mixture of dread and determination. I made a silent promise to myself, and to Mark, wherever he was in that moment, that I would not let this go. I would find the answers I deserved, no matter how much they hurt. I wiped the tears from my cheeks, forced myself to stand tall, and took a step toward the doors. The grief was still there, a heavy shroud over my shoulders, but now there was something else. A spark of purpose, small but growing. Whatever the truth was, it would not remain a secret. Not anymore. I walked back into the hospital with new eyes, every shadow now a potential hiding place for secrets, every whispered conversation a possible clue. The air felt colder, the lighting harsher. I moved through the halls in a daze, replaying the past weeks with Mark on an endless loop in my mind, searching for anything I might have missed. Some stray word, a strange look, an unfinished sentence that could point me toward the truth. My mind spun as I thought back to the night the ambulance first brought him in, how Dr. Porter had ushered me into the waiting room and spoken in gentle, measured tones. He'd said the cancer had taken a turn, that prognosis was poor but never elaborated. I'd asked questions, so many questions, but the answers were always wrapped in medical jargon and vague reassurances. Had he already known then what he was hiding from me now? The memory stung. I recalled the night nurse, the one who always lingered at the door just a moment too long, her eyes darting away when I'd catch her staring at Mark's chart. I remembered overhearing snippets between staff. "It's so sad," one aide whispered. "If only they'd caught it sooner." I'd brushed it off as the helpless sadness people feel around terminal cases. Now I wondered if there was more beneath those words. In the hospital cafeteria, I sat alone with a cooling cup of coffee, watching the staff move in and out with clinical precision. My mind worked feverishly, connecting dots I'd ignored before. There was the incident a week ago when Mark had suddenly worsened overnight. The doctors told me it was expected at this stage, but Mark's face had shown a flicker of surprise and fear when they delivered the news. That night, he'd held my hand tighter than ever and asked me to tell him a story from when we first met. Had he known then that something was off? Was he trying to tell me? My phone buzzed with a message from Mark's sister, worried, asking for updates. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb. I couldn't share any of this, not yet. I needed answers first. I needed proof that my paranoia wasn't just grief twisting my thoughts into suspicion. I wandered the hallways, looking for the two nurses I'd overheard, but they were gone. Every staff member I passed wore a mask of professional detachment, but now, beneath the surface, I saw tension and urgency I hadn't noticed before. I stopped by the nurses' station and asked about Mark's chart. The nurse hesitated, said she'd have to check with Dr. Porter. Her tone was polite, but her eyes flickered with the same guarded look I'd seen so often these past few days. My frustration mounted. I found myself replaying conversations with Mark in the last weeks, moments when he'd tried to talk about making arrangements, or hinted at things I should know. At the time, I'd brushed him off, thinking he was just trying to take care of me, protect me from the hard stuff. Now, every unfinished sentence felt like a missed warning. I remembered his old friend Dave coming to visit, how Mark had pulled him aside for a private conversation. Dave had looked at me with an odd mix of sympathy and guilt when he left. At the time, I'd assumed it was just the pain of seeing an old friend dying. But what if Dave knew something I didn't? With each memory, my anger grew, not just at the hospital staff, but at myself, for not digging deeper, for trusting too easily. I tried calling Dave, but he didn't answer. The phone rang endlessly, echoing my desperation. Back in the hallway outside Mark's room, I pressed my hand to the cool glass of the observation window. Mark lay inside, pale and motionless, machines whirring quietly around him. He looked peaceful, but I wondered now if his silence was the result of exhaustion, medication, or something far more sinister. Resignation to a truth he hadn't been allowed to face. The clues kept piling up, a tangled knot of hints and half-truths. I realized I was standing on the threshold of something huge, something that could change everything I thought I knew about Mark's illness, about his final days, about the people I'd trusted to care for him. I resolved right then that I wouldn't rest until I had the full story. I owed it to Mark, to myself, to the love and the life we'd shared. I wiped my eyes, steeling myself. No matter what the cost, I would uncover the truth. No matter who had tried to keep it hidden, and no matter how much it hurt to face it. The longer I stayed in that hospital, the more suffocating the atmosphere became. Like the air itself was thick with secrets and silent complicity. Every staff member seemed to avoid my eyes, their kindness now tinged with something else I couldn't quite name. I felt invisible and exposed all at once, a woman wandering the halls not just of a hospital but of her own life, suddenly uncertain which parts were true and which were shadow. I couldn't shake the memory of the nurse's whispered conversation, the phrase, "She has a right to know," looping in my mind like a warning bell. It was time to get answers. I marched back to the nurse's station, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "I need to speak to Dr. Porter, now," I said, my words slicing through the gentle hum of the ward. The nurse on duty stiffened, her fingers pausing mid-typing. "He's in with a patient," she began, but I shook my head, cutting her off. "It's urgent, please." Maybe it was the rawness in my voice, or the tears brimming in my eyes, but she nodded and disappeared down the hall. The minutes dragged, my stomach churning, my mind racing with 100 possible scenarios. When Dr. Porter finally arrived, his expression was carefully composed, a practiced look of concern and patience. I saw it now for what it was. A mask. "Mrs. Turner, what's wrong?" he asked. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I overheard two of your nurses. They said you weren't telling me everything about Mark's condition. I want to know the truth, every detail." The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. For a moment, Dr. Porter's mask slipped. He looked down, pinching the bridge of his nose, and I saw the exhaustion and guilt etched in the lines around his eyes. "Mrs. Turner," he began, voice heavy, "I never wanted to make things harder for you. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that sparing you certain details would let you focus on your time with Mark." Anger flared in my chest. "You don't get to decide what I can or can't handle. Tell me." He hesitated, then gestured toward a small office off the hallway. We stepped inside, the door closing behind us with a dull thud. On Mark's most recent scans, we discovered something new, a lesion on his liver that wasn't there before, Dr. Porter admitted, finally meeting my eyes. It wasn't consistent with the spread of his primary cancer. We believe it may have been a medication-induced injury, or even a secondary unrelated issue. We can't be certain because Mark's condition declined too quickly for further testing. My mind reeled. So what does that mean? Was there a chance? My voice broke. Was there a treatment? Something you didn't try? Dr. Porter shook his head quickly. No, there was nothing that could have reversed the damage at that stage. But the reason I didn't say anything was because there was a brief window, about a month ago, where a different medication might have slowed things, if we'd caught it then. The world tilted, grief and guilt battling for control inside me. You're saying Mark's decline might have been preventable? There was a possibility, he admitted quietly. But the signs were subtle. The hospital was overwhelmed, tests were delayed. I made the call not to alarm you. I'm sorry. My knees buckled and I dropped into a chair, my hands covering my face. All this time, I'd been preparing to lose Mark, believing we'd done everything possible. Now I realized we'd been denied even the chance to fight for more time because someone else thought they knew what was best for us. You should have told me, I said, my voice ragged. You should have told him. Dr. Porter nodded, shame in his eyes. You're right. I failed you both. The weight of those words pressed on my chest. I wondered if Mark had sensed this betrayal, if his silences and haunted glances had been his way of mourning the life that slipped away, not just from illness, but from the quiet decisions made behind closed doors. I left the office in a fog, my body numb, my mind spinning. In the hallway, the nurse who'd called Dr. Porter caught my eye and approached. "Mrs. Turner," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. We wanted to tell you, but we were told not to." Her eyes glistened, full of an apology that wasn't truly hers to give. "Thank you," I managed, my voice a broken whisper. "Thank you for caring enough to try." The truth was out, raw and jagged. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, but so was the relief. Finally, I knew. I understood now that the world wasn't as simple as good doctors and bad outcomes. It was a tangle of human error, fear, and misplaced mercy. I wept in the quiet hallway, mourning not just for Mark, but for the lost time, the choices taken from us, and the illusion that love alone could protect us from the cold, impersonal machinery of fate. The truth from Dr. Porter hit me like a wave, but it was only the beginning of the unraveling. As I stumbled down the hall, dazed and clutching at the hospital's institutional walls for support, 1,000 more questions rose in my mind, sharp and relentless. Who else had known? Who else had stood by silently as Mark and I clung to each other, believing we were out of options? The faces of friends and family flashed through my mind, each memory now shadowed by doubt. I replayed those strange visits over the past few weeks, the concerned glances, the awkward silences, the way certain people had avoided meeting my eyes when I spoke about hope, about treatments, about clinging to even a slim chance. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when I finally returned home to gather a few things, that the next piece of the puzzle fell into place. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. Every room was haunted by Mark's absence. As I stood in the kitchen, numb, I noticed Mark's laptop on the counter. Out of habit, I opened it. The screen lit up, and without thinking, I checked his email. I scrolled past the endless flood of hospital reminders, insurance updates, and messages from old friends. But then a subject line caught my eye. Treatment protocol update. Urgent. It was dated a little over a month ago, just before Mark's rapid decline. I opened it. The sender was Dr. Porter's office, but the recipient list was longer than expected. Along with Mark's address, there was another, my sister's. Confusion twisted in my gut. I clicked on the message. The email discussed a new treatment possibility and detailed the need for an immediate decision. It was polite, clinical, and ended with a request for a family consult, one I had never been invited to. My breath caught in my throat. Why would my sister be included? Why had I never heard about this meeting? I scrolled through Mark's messages, my hands shaking. There it was, a reply from my sister. Her words were careful, gentle, almost maternal. We all want what's best for Mark. Anna is so fragile right now. If you feel this could do more harm than good, I support your decision to wait before telling her. Let me know how I can help. The world spun. I dropped the laptop onto the table, my hands numb with shock and anger. My own sister, the person I trusted most outside of Mark, had conspired with the doctors, choosing for me, deciding I was too weak, too delicate, to handle the truth about the man I loved. I felt the betrayal like a physical blow, a cold knife twisting in my chest. I thought of every conversation we'd had over the last month. Every time she'd held my hand and told me to focus on the time you have, every word now ringing false in my ears. She had robbed me of the right to choose. Rage and heartbreak warred inside me. I wanted to call her, to scream, to demand an explanation. But another part of me was so tired, so utterly defeated I could only sit there, staring at the evidence of her betrayal. The pain of Mark's impending loss had been unbearable, but this was a new kind of agony. The realization that someone so close, someone who claimed to love me, could be part of the lie, felt like a wound that would never heal. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table, the world spinning around me, the clock ticking as if in mockery. I replayed every moment from the past month, seeing now the careful orchestration, the gentle steering of my emotions. They had decided I was too weak, too fragile, too broken to face the truth. In trying to protect me, they had stolen my agency, my chance to say goodbye on my own terms, my ability to fight for Mark in whatever way I could. Betrayal, I realized, didn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it came from the people you loved most, people who believed they knew what was best for you, even when it broke your heart. My grief became something sharper, something that demanded action. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could make sure that the truth, my truth and Mark's, would never be buried again. It was time to stop being the victim of other people's choices. The pain would not go away, but I could reclaim my story and ensure that no one else would ever have the right to decide what I could or couldn't handle. The need for justice, for vindication, burned in me, lighting the first flicker of strength I'd felt since Mark's diagnosis. I was done being protected. I was done with secrets. It was time for everyone to know exactly what had happened, and what had been lost because of their misguided mercy. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that bordered on fury. Grief still sat heavily in my chest, but it was sharpened now by something else, a hunger for agency, for justice. I would not allow Mark's story, or my own, to be quietly swept aside under the guise of protection. I showered, dressed, and paced the living room, rehearsing what I needed to do. The world outside was oblivious. The sun rose as usual, cars passed on the street, birds sang. But inside, my life was divided cleanly in two. Before the secret, and after. First, I called my sister. My voice shook with restrained emotion. "I know what you did," I said, skipping any preamble. There was a stunned silence on the other end, and then a tentative, "Anna, Don't," I snapped. "You stole my choice. You decided for me. Why?" The tears came as she tried to explain. She was afraid I'd collapse under the weight of bad news, that I was too tired, too vulnerable, I did it for you, she insisted, but I only felt more alone. You did it for yourself, because you couldn't handle my pain, I replied, and hung up before she could offer more hollow comfort. That moment, the last fragile thread between us snapped. Next, I turned my attention to the hospital. I spent the day gathering every document I could find. Mark's medical records, the emails, even my own journals. The process was both painful and oddly empowering, as if each page was a piece of my strength returning. I called a patient advocacy group I'd found online, describing everything that had happened, how critical information had been withheld, how both my husband and I had been denied a say in his treatment. The advocate listened, horrified, and encouraged me to file a formal complaint with the hospital administration. She explained that I had rights, not just as a grieving widow, but as someone deliberately kept from making medical decisions for her loved one. With her guidance, I wrote a detailed, honest letter to the hospital board, copying the state medical licensing board and even the local press. In the letter, I told the whole story: the missed chance, the email, the family meeting I was never invited to. I named names, not to be cruel, but because I was done protecting those who had failed to protect me and Mark. I described the aftermath, the loneliness, the way grief had been made infinitely worse by knowing that someone else had decided I was too weak for the truth. The act of writing the letter was cathartic. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control, as if I was finally wresting my life back from those who thought they knew best. In my closing lines, I asked the hospital to confront its culture of paternalism, to see patients and their families as people, not problems to be managed or children to be coddled. I requested that the hospital make changes to ensure no one else would be left in the dark. I hit send, and immediately forwarded the letter to Mark's old friend Dave, to every relative, to anyone who'd been quietly shut out. The response was swift. The hospital called me, offering to discuss my concerns in person, but I declined their invitation for a private, quiet meeting. I wanted this story out in the open, for every doctor, nurse, and patient in that hospital to know what had happened. The local newspaper picked up my letter and asked for an interview. The article ran with the headline, "Family Denied Truth in Final Days, Hospital Faces Grieving Widow's Complaint." For the first time, I saw the secret laid bare in black and white. People reached out, strangers, other widows, even a few doctors who quietly admitted the system was broken. My actions started a ripple, a chorus of voices demanding honesty and dignity for families like mine. I felt Mark's presence, strong and steady, guiding me with the memory of his courage and kindness. I realized that in fighting for the truth, I was honoring him more than I ever could have by quietly accepting their choices. And step by step, I began to reclaim my life, not as someone who had been protected and silenced, but as someone who had found her voice through pain and betrayal. The grief remained, but now it shared space with something new: resolve. I wasn't just a widow or a victim. I was the teller of our story, and I would make sure it was heard. The hospital administration was slow to react publicly, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. The newspaper article sparked debate across the city, on radio, online forums, social media. Other families stepped forward with eerily similar tales: diagnoses and decisions made behind closed doors, protective omissions that left them doubting, grieving not just their loss but the very foundations of trust in those meant to help them. For the first time since Mark's illness began, I felt less alone. Each message I received from strangers, each late-night phone call, was a small beam of light breaking through the heavy fog of my grief. The hospital soon held a public forum to address the growing outcry. I went, hand trembling but head high, determined to speak Mark's name in a place where he'd been reduced to patient and case. When they called on me, I stood in front of a crowded room, doctors, nurses, administrators, patients, families, and told my story. I spoke not just of the betrayal by staff, but of the quieter, more personal betrayal by those who thought they knew what I could endure. I described Mark's final days, the conversations we might have had, the decisions we might have made together if only the truth had not been filtered through other people's fears. There were tears in the audience, some angry, some shamed, some simply recognizing their own pain in my words. A doctor on the panel admitted that sometimes compassion becomes an excuse for paternalism. The hospital announced immediate changes: a new policy requiring full disclosure and written consent for all major changes to care, an ombudsman role for families, new training for doctors on communication and consent. I was invited to join a family advisory board, and though I hesitated, unsure if I could bear reliving my story, I eventually agreed. It felt like something Mark would want, a way to ensure our pain could bring something good to others. Justice, I realized, rarely came in the shape of courtrooms or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it was a quiet, steady drip: a letter, a headline, a speech, a change in policy. Poetic justice arrived when one of the nurses who had wanted to tell me the truth was promoted to a role where her voice could no longer be silenced by superiors. And as the hospital's practices changed, families after mine would no longer be left in the dark, denied the right to face pain with open eyes and clear choices. The news story lingered in the community for weeks, sparking overdue conversations in homes, doctors' offices, and hospital corridors. My sister called, leaving a message. She cried, apologized again, tried to explain, but I needed space. Some wounds would take years to heal, if they ever truly did. The pain she caused had set off the chain reaction that led me here, shattered, remade, and ultimately empowered by the truth. I visited Mark's grave on a cool morning in early autumn, a breeze stirring the trees overhead. I spoke to him, not just of my sorrow, but of what had changed. How his story had become a beacon. How I had found the strength he always said I possessed. "They know now, Mark," I whispered, tracing his name on the stone. "They know what they took from us, and they won't do it to anyone else." There was no joy in victory, only a bittersweet sense of completion. Justice wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning, a return to honesty and dignity. As I left the cemetery, I felt lighter. The ache remained, but it was no longer a cage. In exposing the truth, I had made meaning out of suffering, and found closure not just for Mark, but for myself. The months that followed were a strange mixture of healing and reckoning. The hospital's reforms took time to implement, and while not every change was perfect, I saw real progress. Families began to speak openly about their experiences, and the culture of silence that had once suffocated us began to crack. I found myself becoming an unexpected advocate, speaking at events, sharing my story not to dwell on the pain, but to shine a light on the importance of truth, respect, and choice in medicine. It wasn't easy. Some days the grief still hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me under when I least expected it. But those moments were tempered now by the knowledge that I was carrying Mark's legacy forward in a way that mattered. My relationship with my sister remained fragile. Some wounds take longer to heal, and trust isn't rebuilt overnight. But over time, we began to talk again, slowly, cautiously. I realized that betrayal, as devastating as it is, doesn't have to mean the end. It can also be a beginning, a chance to redefine connections and boundaries with honesty. I took up painting again, something I'd abandoned during Mark's illness. Each brushstroke was a small act of reclaiming joy, of creating beauty from brokenness. It was therapy, and a tribute, a way to channel my emotions when words failed me. On quiet evenings, I still found myself reaching for the phone to share a thought or a laugh with Mark. But then I reminded myself that he was with me, in every memory, every choice I made, every step I took forward. Saying goodbye to him was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the beginning of discovering who I truly was beyond that pain. I learned that strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means picking yourself up after the cracks show, allowing yourself to feel, and then moving forward anyway. The secret that nearly destroyed me became the catalyst for a new chapter, a story of resilience, courage, and truth. I hope that by sharing this, others facing betrayal and loss know they're not alone. That even in the darkest moments, there is a way through. Life doesn't stop because of grief. It changes. It demands we find new ways to live, love, and fight for what's right. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be silenced. This is my story, our story, the story of love, loss, betrayal, and ultimately, redemption.